My name is John Louder, and it's a great privilege for me to be your pastor. Love it being here. And today we kick off a brand new series, a series on the life of Moses. And in case you're wondering, Moses is with us. I don't know if you were aware of that, but actually, that's Moses right over there. I think it has a striking resemblance to Frank Ringwald. So Frank, would you mind standing up, please, and just... I just kind of want you guys to see. See, I don't know about you, but I told Frank this morning, I said, Frank, Moses led the people of Israel out when you're 80, when he was 80. And I said, how old are you, Frank? He said, I'm going to be 75. When you coming up 75? I said, your best years are ahead of you, man. This is exciting. So anyway, we're just... I'm really thrilled to be able to do this series on Moses. I love character studies. I love just going through the Old Testament because it's so practical. It's so easy to read these things, read about the events of the life of Moses and go, yeah, I can picture myself there. And so today, we're kicking off a series, and the series is called Moses, Navigating Life's Twists and Turns. Even though more than likely you and I are not going to experience the same sorts of things that Moses did. More than likely we're not going to be able to in our lifetime, even though it would be super cool, but more than likely we're not going to be able to walk through a parted Red Sea. More than likely you and I are not going to be able to eat manna from heaven. More than likely you and I are not going to be able to stand before Pharaoh if there is one. We're not going to be able to do these things. And yet, Moses had his life, and it's going through all these twists and turns and hills and valleys, and yet somehow he gets to the end, and God really did an amazing work in his life through all the uncertainties of life. And so as he's going through all this stuff, it's like, how did he grow? What were the things that God was doing? How did he become the man that he was? How can we become the people that we want to be in spite of all these things? And so today, we're going to start with the story, and that is, we're going to start at the very beginning in Exodus chapter 1. That's where we're going to be today. And we're going to talk about a subject that is very relevant, I think, to all of us. And that is the subject of fear. The subject of fear. What are you most afraid of? If you were to think, okay, if I go through and I really look at it, what am I most afraid of? How many of you would rank spiders up there pretty high? All right. How about public speaking? Sophie got up front here. I was so proud of you, Sophie. Nice job, Sophie. I was so proud of her. She got up front to do public speaking. How many of you would public speaking, getting up front in a group like this and having to talk, would rank up there pretty high? A few of. How many claustrophobia? Being like in a really tight place type of a thing? Yeah, some of you like that. Okay. How many of you would it be a visit from the in-laws? How many? Okay, a few people. As both of them raise their hand. Which one? That's a. When there was a study that was done back in 2015 by a school called the Williamson Institute, and they did this study as to what fears occupy the greatest fears of Americans, and this was in the year 2015. And so in looking through these fears, they went through and they did a scale of 1 to 4. 1 means I'm not afraid at all. 2 means I'm pretty afraid. 3 means I'm quite afraid. 4 means I'm terrified. I'm very afraid. Amazingly enough, which I was actually pleasantly surprised about, Americans are not generally super afraid. Because the average score, the highest of all the different categories, the average was just over 2, almost like 2.25. So people are pretty afraid on certain things. But when you look at those within that who said, I'm pretty afraid about this, what were the categories that ranked highest? And so I wanted to give you this slide just to show you. Not that you can read this because it's really tiny, but anyway. Of those who said they're actually quite afraid, the number one thing was corruption of government officials. The thing that occupies the greatest fear of people in America, more than spiders, more than snakes, more than dying even, more than claustrophobia, more than anything, was corruption to government officials. In fact, 58% of people said that's what it was. The next one was cyber terrorism. Not just terrorism, but cyber terrorism. Interestingly, cyber terrorism, corporate tracking of personal information, government tracking of personal information, 3 of those were in the top 5. So, believe it or not, technology fears are the top 3 of 5 concerns that occupy most Americans, that occupy a lot of Americans. We actually have quite a bit to fear. Terrorist attacks. So you have Big Brother corporate tracking, you've got Big Brother government tracking, you've got terrorists, you've got all these things. That occupies the fears of a lot of people. And then it would go on down. Biowarfare, identity theft, economic collapse, running out of money in the future, credit card fraud. All total, there were about 90 different things, but this was the top 10. Fear. The definition. An unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness of danger. An unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by anticipation, not quite there yet, or awareness, it's there, awareness of danger. It's an anxious concern. So I'm not just concerned, but there's something inside of me that's going off. How many of you today have a slight fear of the second Tuesday in November? Yeah. Especially, I don't know if you watch the debate or whatever else. I mean, we see some of these things, and the news media is constantly keeping it before us. This needs to be thought of. This needs to be thought of. Can you imagine if he gets in? Can you imagine if she gets in? Can you imagine all the... And so we're constantly bombarded with, oh no, there is this, almost this dread that's coming about what's going to happen in our election. Often strong emotion, unpleasant, strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness of danger. How do we handle it? I want you to turn, keep your fingers in Exodus 1, because we're promised we're going to come back. We're going to spend a lot of time here. But I want you to turn to Ephesians chapter 1. Ephesians chapter 1. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 1. And verse 11. Ephesians 1 and verse 11. Paul says this, "In him we were also chosen, having been predestined according to the plan of him who works out everything in conformity with the purpose of his will." Now, Paul's getting here when he's talking about this section. He's talking about our relationship with God. We were chosen by God to be in a relationship with him. Paul doesn't really explain it here. He doesn't go into a whole lot of detail. He just says that's the reality. We were chosen by God to enjoy a relationship with him. And it's interesting because he then tacks on. He says, we were chosen by God, and it's interesting what he says. By him, and then he gives a little caveat. Him who works out everything in conformity with the purpose of his will. So what Paul is saying is here is we were chosen by a God who is in control of everything. What this means is God is sovereign. God has absolute power, absolute authority, absolute control over everything, bar none. And when Paul looked at God, and when Paul looked at the world, and when he looked at salvation, when he looked at whatever it was, when he looked at God, he saw a sovereign God who was over it all. It wasn't even a question to him. When he saw God, he saw power, and he saw control. No matter what the chaos of the world was doing, no matter who was in power in the Roman government, no matter whether he was being shipwrecked or whether he was sailing happily at sea on one of those lounge chairs, whatever it was, no matter what the situation was, God was in control. As we sang our songs this morning, I kept thinking, You know, Ryan, thank you for picking the songs that you do. You do such a great job. And as we were singing the songs, there was a few words in there, and I can't remember exactly what they were. But some of the words kept coming back. Like it was kind of like, why do we fear? We will not fear. Why? Because God is in control. It didn't say those exact words. But we sing the songs and the words roll out of our mouth. God's in control. And second Tuesday of November is coming. Oh no, what are we going to do? What's going to happen? Oh no, what's going to happen when he gets in? What about if she gets in? And we fret and we worry because God is in control from 9:45 to 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings, right? And then we walk out of the building and somehow God lost the steering wheel and the world is going off the cliff and we go, Lord, I don't know if I can trust you. Him who works out everything in conformity with the purpose of his will. Here's what I want to tell you this morning. This is where we're going to go. Faith fears God more. This morning I'm not going to tell you that you can't have any fears. Spiders are crazy. Spiders are scary things. I get it. I have a fear of spiders. I'm not going to lie. And just because I read my Bible doesn't mean that I happen to want to have spiders all in my bed. Can you imagine having spiders in your bed? Can you imagine, some of you? See, I know some of you are like, oh, that's creepy. I get it. It's not that we can't have fears, but faith enables us to fear God more. You see, the definition of fear: an unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness of danger, anxious concern. Number 2, profound reverence and awe, especially toward God. That's at the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. See, fear says I can either be scared to death and have this really unpleasant emotion that's caused by anxiety or whatever else, or I can have a profound reverence and fear of God. Profound reverence and awe of God, who is bigger, greater, stronger, whatever, than everything else. I can fear everything here, or I can have profound awe of God. What I want to tell you this morning is faith, when you have faith, when you and I have faith, it enables us to fear God more. It's not to say we can't have this. It's just our awe and our reverence of God goes way up. And we're going to look at that as it comes out of Exodus chapter 1. So if we can go back there now, we're going to pick up. Basically, here what you have is the nation of Israel is down in Egypt. Now, what got them down to Egypt? God had his chosen people. He chose Abraham, and he said, through you, Abraham, all the nations of the world are going to be blessed. Genesis chapter 12. So he chooses Abraham. I'm going to bless you like crazy. Those who bless you, I'm going to bless. And those who curse you, I'm going to curse. And so that's what was happening. And Abraham had a son. His name was Isaac. And then Isaac had a son. Actually, had a couple sons, but the main one was Jacob. And then Jacob had 12 sons. And we're not going to go through all of them. Simeon, Judah, Benjamin, Ephraim, Dan, all the different ones, okay? He had all those different sons, 12 of them. And one son gets shipped off down to Egypt, not by choice, but because he got sold off into slavery because his brothers hated him. He goes down to Egypt, and while down there, he encounters a man by the name of Potiphar. He becomes a slave in Potiphar's house, but God blessed Joseph while he was down there. Not only does he bless Potiphar's house because of Joseph, but he actually finds a way to be able to get before Pharaoh, and he interprets a dream. And because he interprets the dream, sure enough, it worked out exactly what Joseph said it was going to, because God told him. And because of the way in which he handled it, Pharaoh said, I want you to be second in command. So Joseph went from a prison slave to second in command of the Egyptian empire in a matter of minutes. How does that happen? It's God. God's the only one that can do that. And so Joseph, while there, Pharaoh says to Joseph, I want to bless you, Joseph, because you've been awesome to us. I want to bless you, and so why don't you bring your family down with you, and they can live in the land. And we're going to give them this place called Goshen. Now, Goshen was a very fertile part of the land of Egypt. And so you have the shepherds and the farm people that were Joseph and his descendants. And so they settle in this land. And God tells us that they not just settled there, they actually grew and multiplied. And so I want you to see in verse 5 of Exodus 1, the descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. Now, more than likely, 70 is just the men. Okay? That's probably what it is. 70 is probably just the men. That's the way they counted stuff back then. Women weren't as important. But they would count the men, and so that it's probably 70 guys. Plus their families, so who knows, maybe a couple hundred max, somewhere in that area. That's what it started. Verse 6, now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died. But the Israelites were fruitful and multiplied greatly and became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them. Now we know that from when Abraham received his promise until the day that they left Egypt and became entered into the promised land was a period of 400 years. That's about what it was. So 400 years from Abraham's promise to when they entered the promised land, which tells us that during this time, literally, they were like rabbits. God blessed them. You know, have you ever had one of those pet mice and you had two of them and they told you it was two females at the pet store? And that's what they told you, two females, and somehow, miraculously, two females produced a litter of little meese, right? A litter of them, and then they just keep growing and growing and growing. You're like, or guppies, or something like that. I mean, it's just they spread. That's what happened with Israel. Somehow, these 70 people, by now, millions, okay? They are in the millions of people. By the time a couple hundred years goes by, roughly probably 300 years. 300 years, millions of them are now there. And so what do we find? We find fear settling in to our story. Verse 8. Then a new king, who did not know about Joseph, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to the people, the Israelites have become much too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave our country. So here's the first thing I need you to know about fear. Fear can come from both real and perceived threats. Now I know this was incredibly revelatory for you. I mean, I'm sure you're blown away by this amazing perception that I have. Fear does not have to be real to be fearful. Okay? It doesn't even have to have happened, but yet that's what we have going on here with Pharaoh. Pharaoh looks at the situation. He sees all these millions of people. Now, as far as we can tell, the Israelites were doing nothing. It's not like they were sharpening their swords while the Egyptians were walking by. We're more than you. We're going to get you someday. For all we know in the story, they're just living their lives. That's all that they're doing. They're being the little shepherds and the people over there. But you have this Pharaoh who looks at the people and he says, oh my goodness, they're getting even more than us, potentially even. And if we don't do something, here's what he thinks. If war breaks out, if the enemy comes and they say, hey, we want you to fight with us. Well, okay, we'll fight with you. We don't even like these Egyptians. We know what's going to happen. They're going to hate us and they're going to fight against us. And they're going to leave our country. We need them here. Because you know what? They provide some of the economic background. They provide all these things that are here. Therefore, if this takes place, we need to be ahead of the game. Okay? We need to be proactive in the situation. We can't be reactive. So there's a threat that's potentially out there. Let's deal with it. So fear can come from both real and perceived threats. In this case, we see no record of it, but that's what was going on. Second thing about fear. Fear demands control be restored. Fear demands control be restored. Verse 10, come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So, what do? They put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. The Israelites are numerous, so the Egyptians come together. They were the stronger, they were the superpower, they had the upper hand, and so what do? They enslave them. They find slave masters to stand over them and to beat them, do whatever else, because why? When I'm in fear, if I feel fear, I want to do whatever it takes to restore control. You think about it. You're scared of the dark. You're scared of the dark, and you have to walk outside to go from your house back to the shed to get something out of the shed. It's really dark. The moon's not even out. And so you're scared of the dark, and you sit there, and you know that there's all sorts of bears and everything else that live in your neighborhood. You know that. So as a result, what do? You open the door, you kind of look around, and then you pull your phone out. What do? You find a little flashlight app, turn the flashlight on. Nope, no bears. All right, I guess I can go. I walk out there. What's happened? My ears are heightened. I'm aware of every little sound. Turn the flashlight as I go. I go to the shed. I open up the shed. I'm checking around in that thing. I'm going, why? Because fear demands that control be restored. And as long as it's within my power to do something, I'm going to do it. You're in the house. It's dark. It's whatever else. So what do? You turn the light on. Fear. Somebody comes along and all of a sudden grabs you. Somebody comes along from behind and grabs you. What do? Go limp like a rag? Okay, take me. What do? The muscles tense up. And you're like, I got to do something. You start swinging, doing whatever you can. Fear demands that control be restored. So here you have the people of Egypt as they're there, and they're seeing the situation. Oh no, they're going to overrun us. They're going to leave. They're going to fight against us. We're all going to die because of this. Got to restore some control. Slavery. Let's try slavery. That will certainly fix things. Number 3. Fear can lead to ruthless behavior toward our opposition. Verse 12. The more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. This plan was going nowhere. I need control to be restored. The problem is it's having the opposite effect. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. Now, and worked them ruthlessly. Now let's look at that word dread for just a second. The word dread it's a Hebrew word and the word is kutz. Okay, it's the word kutz. Well, here's the thing. To dread something means it's to be made disgusted or anxious. To be made disgusted or anxious. Go back to the debate. You know which debate I'm talking about. Go back to the debate. You're flipping on the TV and you're watching this thing, and I guarantee emotions were going, weren't they? You see, Coots was happening in your life. I promise you, it was happening. And if it wasn't happening in your life while you were watching the debate, the next morning when you went to work and you heard all the whining and the complaining from everybody about whatever candidate they liked better, it caused something going on in here. It's like this little pit in your stomach. That's Coots. You see, it's this dread, it's this distressed, it's anxiety. Other synonyms for it. To abhor. To be grieved. I like this one. To loathe. Do you have any Coots going on toward a particular person who's running for the election today? It means to vex and to be weary. That's literally what's going on. You see, fear, when we're afraid of something, when we're afraid of someone, when we're afraid of whatever it is, it can actually cause us to lead toward ruthless behavior. It's so amazing to me. It's so amazing to me, and having been a pastor for a number of years, having walked through this whole political process, and I'm just simply picking on this only because it's an easy one. It's very obvious. And then I'll make some application toward other stuff. But let's pick on the political situation for just a little bit. I watch Christians who are well-speaking, well-meaning Christians, love God, would never really come out and say horrible things about somebody else, except political leaders. You see, it's almost as if the filters come off. Even though I know that they're created in the image of God, even though they're children of God, and well, as long as they know Jesus, but they certainly were created in the image of God. God loves them just the way they are. But yet it's almost like we get a pass when we look at political leaders and we say, they deserve to be treated and talked about like this. fear, and a lot of times it's driven by fear. We're afraid that if that one gets into power, the wheels are definitely coming off of the bus of our nation. If they get into power, God is going to go, oh no. It was all set unless he got in or unless she got in. Great, now what am I supposed to do? And so we fear, and it leads to ruthless behavior. It can lead to it. You see, this was the situation, whether it's, I don't care what world war, genocide, whatever else. How does ruthless behavior get started? It gets started because there is a fear that somehow they will have an ability to influence us more than we want to influence them. And so we have to go about this differently. This was World War II, Germans toward the Jews. This was the Japanese toward so many of their opponents over there on the Far East. You had all these things. It's been history time and time and time again. Fear demands that control be restored, and when control is not restored, then I have to up the ante and I have to take it to the next level. See, the irony is this. We are somehow fed the line that we are really in control. Literally, really, how much control do you have over your election? You are one vote. That's what you are. Oh, sure, we can talk and we can listen, we can encourage other people to do this, but really, ultimately, you have one vote. That's what you got. When it comes to the dark, guess what? Darkness happens every night without fail, right? It does. It comes around with amazing regularity. It just comes. Spiders. You are never going to be able to eradicate spiders. I never will, no matter how much bug stuff I spray around my house. They keep coming. We used to have Bonnie live with us, and every year I would go out twice a year and I'd spray the whole foundation all around the house, and she would continuously inform me that spiders were getting into the basement. As long as they were in the basement with her, it didn't matter. But it was when they came upstairs, that's when it was a problem. No matter what I do, the spiders keep coming. Snakes, dying, claustrophobia. Even though I try to control this stuff, I can't. And so what does it do? Oftentimes it leads me toward ruthless behavior, toward things that I can control, or that I think I have to control. And so what's the ruthless behavior in this situation? They spread, they work them ruthlessly. All right, not only are you going to have to make bricks and mortar, you're going to have to make bricks without straw. Now take that. You're going to have to go collect it. You're going to have to go in the hills. We're not changing the quotas. Beatings will commence and continue. No matter what happens, it's just going to be that way. And what happens to the people? Do they become demoralized? No. They somehow produce even more little Hebrews. Verse 15. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you help the Hebrew women in childbirth and observe them on the delivery stool, if it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. I love this. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? I told you, kill them all. You should fear me. Verse 19. The midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous, and they give birth before the midwives even arrive. These crazy Hebrews, man, they're really good at childbirth, and we get there and the baby's already gone and already come out. What are we supposed to do? So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. What I want to know is, did Pharaoh sit there and go, maybe they are more vigorous? We find no record that he was like, oh, you're lying to me right now. He just was there. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all of his people. Every boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. You see Pharaoh, as he's taking the situation, and the situation goes from being, we're going to just enslave them, to, no, we're going to kill the little babies, and And we're going to do it at the hands of the midwives. Now, how are they going to do that and not be found out? I don't know. I don't know what the plan was, but the Hebrew midwives, they didn't go along with it. So what does Pharaoh then have to do? You know what? If I can't trust you midwives there to do this stuff, Egyptians, all of you, if you see a little Hebrew baby boy running around, I want you to grab him and chuck him into the Nile. And we think, can you imagine if the rule went out? Every Dutch baby boy must be chucked into the Grand River. Can you imagine, in your brain, you would think to yourself, what has happened to America? And we think, ugh, that'll never happen. Never happen. We're good, well-meaning people. See, the problem is fear. Fear sets in, it demands control, and when control can't be found, it turns to ruthlessness oftentimes. We must find control. It can happen. It's happened time and time again throughout history. So let's talk about faith. Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1. It says this, "Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see." Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. So when I look at the world, faith allows me to be sure of what I hope for. What do I hope for? I hope for a God who is totally in control to exert His control. Now, just because my hope is in that God, God never promises that in my lifetime He's going to do that. He never does. But I am sure, just as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they stood in that fiery furnace, just before they were getting ready to be put in there, and Nebuchadnezzar says, "So what are you going to say for yourself? You honestly think that somehow God's going to save you?" And they said, "Yeah, my God can save us." Now, He may choose not to, but my God can save us from the fiery furnace. My God, the God that I serve and the God that you serve, is able to do whatever He wants. God works out everything in conformity to the purpose of His will. Here's the problem, though. Oftentimes, His will doesn't look like your will and my will. Faith, though, says, I trust in a God who can, even though He may not. And so faith is being sure of what I hope for and certain of what I do not see. So what is this? Faith sees a bigger God. When we look throughout our thing, you find in stark contrast, okay? I want you to look back in verse 10, okay, of Exodus chapter 1. Look at verse 10. Here is the king. This is the Pharaoh. Amazingly enough, we are never told what his name is. In fact, much debate has gone out trying to find out who this king was, who this Pharaoh was. There is so much disagreement out there, nobody really knows who it is. So the most powerful man in the world, he's hailed out there as the most powerful man, and yet we have no idea what his name is. No idea. So this, and I'll explain the relevance in just a second. Here is the most powerful man in the world. Here's what he resorts to when fear comes into play. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them. Okay, guys, let's have a cabinet meeting. Come on in. Let's talk about some stuff. We got to figure this thing out because the wheels are coming off. We got to figure this thing out. Fear is setting in. Let's deal with this. What great ideas do you have? Let's kill them all. We can't probably do that. We kind of need them. Okay, let's treat them with kindness. No, they're going to spread like crazy if we do that. Oh, man. Slavery. Let's try slavery. That's a great idea. I like your ideas. Let's deal shrewdly with them. What does the most powerful man do that we have no idea what his name is? He fears people. That's what he does. And therefore, he ends up with some plan that goes haywire and actually has the opposite result. And then we skip down to verse 17. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. What were the names of the midwives? Shiphrah and Puah. We know the names of the Hebrew midwives from that day and age. Why? Because they feared God. And yet, the most powerful king of the known world at that time, we have no idea who he is. So when it comes to this, what does God hold up as more important? Is it more important that we use all of our brain power and all of our shrewdness and all of our dealings to figure out all the problems and situations that we have? Is that what he says? Yes, I gave you a brain. Would you just use the dumb thing? Or does he say, trust me. Just trust me. When Shiphrah and Puah looked at Pharaoh and they looked at God, it wasn't, even though Pharaoh standing before him, maybe with bad breath, bad teeth, who knows, as he's saying, you, in my best Egyptian, you must kill the Hebrew baby boys. As my kid is thoroughly embarrassed that I'm doing this. You must kill the Hebrew boys. And Shiphrah and Puah go, yeah, but God says we need to let them live. I don't know. I know you're really scary, but my God's bigger. Okay, Pharaoh, whatever. And then they go out and do something different. For how many of us, when we have the immediate concern, the TV's blaring at us, the issues are all around us, we're reading in the newspaper. Do anybody read the newspaper anymore? Anyway, we're scanning the headlines on Yahoo News or whatever else. We're scanning the headlines. We read this stuff, and it looks so compelling, like the world is falling apart. And we see this, and the reaction is, God seems so much smaller. Faith is the evidence of things not seen, the evidence of things that's hoped for. Faith says, I see a God that is bigger, and that's what I'm going to choose to look at. I get it. The headlines seem really down. I get it. The world seems to be really bad. I get it. That darkness seems really strong. I get it. That spider is not just this big. He's this big. I get it. Faith sees a bigger God. I want you to look in Psalm 46, please. Psalm 46 and verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear. Though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. Look down in verse 6, please. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, and what happens? The earth melts. Here you have the waves, and they're raging. Oftentimes throughout poetic literature, the water and the waves is viewed as the ultimate power. It was fearful. I mean, who's going to control water and waves? And yet it says, God, all he does is say the word, and it says the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us, verse 7, and the God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see the works of the Lord, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Be still and know I am God. When you think that Obama is that powerful, be still and know he ain't God. When you think that the election is going to be really bad, be still and know they are not God. Be still and know when you are looking outside, there is nothing that can happen to you that God does not allow or whatever else. Be still and know God is still on the throne. Faith sees a bigger God. The second thing is this: faith sees a bigger purpose. You see, it's interesting. The nation of Egypt, the nation of Israel, when they were down in Egypt, God doesn't seem to be doing anything. Where was God when when the Egyptians came along and said, it's time that you guys become slaves? Where's God? Do you think anybody's back there going, where's God in all this? Why is he not seeing it? How many people lost their lives as Hebrews because of the slavery and the tyrannical nature of this dictator king who's now in power in Egypt? How many people lost their lives? And you're saying, God, why are you not doing anything? Why are you not doing anything? For all we know, God seems silent. Not just for a year, not just for 10 years, not for 100 years, but really from Joseph until Exodus 1, and we read this, God doesn't seem to be doing anything. And so we look and we say, look what's happening in our country. You think times have changed in the last few years? And we go, oh, God is out of control. We better figure this thing out. We better take it back. We better take back the control because God doesn't seem to be caring anymore. He seems to let it go. And what is God? Faith says, God, what are you up to? Why are you giving us these people? Why are you putting these people? Why are these our two best choices? Why is it that we have this situation? Why is it that we have this agenda, this homosexual agenda that seems to be growing leaps and bounds every day? Why? God, what are you doing? Faith sees a God who's bigger than any of that. Faith sees a God that has a purpose in all of this. And therefore, faith says, rather than fearing this and getting this fear in my gut that makes me paralyzed, fear says, I'm going to choose to fear God more and have more profound reverence and more awe for a God who can do anything whenever He chooses to do it. Faith sees a bigger God. Faith sees a bigger purpose. Wrapping up this morning, I want you to turn to Job. Job 42. Just before Psalms, Job, Psalms. So, yeah, just a couple pages back. The book of Job is a crazy book. It really is. As Job was a man who feared God. And even though he feared God, God took away so many things. And he did it basically to show the devil. Devil, you can do anything you want to with Job. But trust me, he's never going to turn his back on me. Job is a man after my heart. And sure enough, what does the devil do? He inflicts unbelievable pain and suffering on Job. And what does Job do? He handles it with grace. He really does. Even though he questions, he still handles it with grace. And we find even as his friends come along, and we know you did something wrong, Job. We know you did. You just fess up to it, and then God will take it all away. I don't know what I did. But even toward the end, we still find Job coming back going, God, I just don't know. What are you doing here? I lost my family. I lost my kids. I lost my wealth. I lost all this sort of stuff. What are you doing? And God finally shows up, and He speaks to Job in chapter 38. And 38 through 41 is God basically saying, I'm God, you're not. Shut your mouth. That's pretty much what it is. And what is Job's response? If you read 38 to 41, it's incredible. As God says, I can do this, can you? No, I didn't think so. I can do this, can you? No, didn't think so. I can do that, this. Can you do it? No, I didn't think so. So who are you to question me? I am God, you are definitely not, Job. And so what is Job's response in Job 42, verse 1? Then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do all things. No plan of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is that? Who is this? I can get it out. Who is this that obscures my counsel without knowledge? Surely, I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. You said, listen now and I will speak. I will question you and you shall answer me. My eyes had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. As Job is confronted with a God who deserves to be feared, Job's response is what? Oh, panic. Oh no, what are we going to do? His response is, I humble myself. Faith fears God more. Are you afraid today of what's coming up in November? Fear God more. Are you afraid of what's happening with your health? Maybe you got some doctor's appointments showing up or something. You're scared to death about what's going to come out. Faith fears God more. Are you afraid of something going on in your family? Financial difficulties, relational difficulties, whatever else. God can do anything. Faith fears God more. Do you know how we grow in our faith? By getting to know Him. Do you want to see your fear go away? Get to know a bigger God. The God of the Bible is an amazing, amazing God. And the devil has all of us convinced that we don't need to know him to do life. And so the church in America is so anemic and dead. Why? Because so often people are waiting for the pastor to tell them all the things that they should know. If I was the one reporting on what your spouse was like, how much would you want to get to know them? I would show up once a week and tell them all about your spouse. How much would you know him? You wouldn't. It's the same thing with God. He wants to know you. This week, I challenge you, read Job 38 through 42. Just read it. Read Psalm 46. Read Exodus chapter 2 as it goes on. And you are going to see a God who is in control. You're going to see a God who deserves to be worshiped. Faith fears God more. Take your fears. Give them to God. See what he does. I'm going to ask the band to come on up as we're going to sing our last song. We don't serve a God who is dead. We don't serve a God who is up there just sitting in his easy chair sleeping. We serve a God who is living, he's active, he's powerful. We serve a God who's totally in control. May we remember that when fears come. Let's all stand together as we close in prayer. God, it's a privilege to come today and to worship you and to put you back in the rightful place in our lives, and that is a position of superiority, a position of sovereignty. God, I know, as we go through challenges, even right now in our own marriage, in our own stuff, as we're dealing with financial things, even in our own life, God, the temptation is there to worry and to fret. But God, I pray that I would fear you more. I pray that I would put all my fears into perspective as they relate to you. May I remember that you're in control and you're going to work it out in conformity to your purpose. And may I trust you. And for every person who's here today, no matter what they're fearful of today, I pray that they would be able to surrender that at your altar and be able to give it to you and say, God, have your way. We trust you more. Bring a much bigger picture of yourself to Frontline Bible Church and to the Christians in our world. In Jesus' name we pray, and all those in agreement said, amen.